Good afternoon. I welcome everyone to the press center of the Russian Foreign Ministry. In our weekly briefing, we have Russian foreign correspondents with us. The broadcast is carried out from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. We begin with the schedule of the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry on September 19th. Under the chairmanship of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, a regular meeting of the Business Council under the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our country will be held on the eve of the upcoming 9th of October in Dushanbe, the second Russia-Central Asia Summit. It is planned to discuss with representatives of domestic business relevant for Russian companies a range of development of mutually beneficial cooperation with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan in trade and economic, investment, industrial, scientific and technical fields. On September 23rd, the high-level week of the 80th anniversary session of the UN General Assembly starts in New York, which, without exaggeration, will become one of the key international events of the year. The Russian delegation, as you know, will be headed by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. According to tradition, the minister's work schedule will be more than saturated, and now the central element will be a speech from the rostrum of the General Assembly. The performance is tentatively scheduled for the 27th of September. But I would like to say that this date will be officially announced to you and confirmed later. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will also take part in a number of high-level multilateral events, including through the STO, the BRICS group of friends in defense of the UN Charter. And in addition, the foreign minister is scheduled to have a wide range of bilateral contacts, as well as a conversation, of course, with the Secretary General of the World Organization, Mr. Guterres. On September 25th, on the sidelines of the 80th anniversary session of the UN General Assembly, the Russian foreign minister will take part in the next meeting of the foreign ministers of the Group of 20. This will allow a substantive discussion of the state of international relations in the context of geopolitical instability and fragmentation of the global economy, the general vector of the exchange of views on the interconnection of peace, as well as the development and integration of the efforts of the G20 and the United Nations in this area. The presidents of the states are like-minded people and partners in BRICS. South Africa, the series Ramaphosa, and Brazil will be asked by bold Lula as the current and previous presidents of the G20. The speech of the Russian foreign minister will lay down the main Russian approaches to strengthening the central role of the UN and building interstate communication based on mutual respect and sovereign equality, based on the principles of indivisible security and a non-discriminatory economic environment. The high-level week will take place against the backdrop of increasing turbulence, fragmentation, as I have already said, on the world stage, which is largely based on the desire of the collective West to maintain its elusive dominance through neocolonial methods, attempts to impose an odious concept, as they formulated it, of a rules-based world order and subordinate international institutions to its will. In view of the 80th anniversary, special attention will be paid to a rigorous analysis of the successes and failures of the United Nations. And in this context, the Russian delegation will focus on promoting the unification agenda, strengthening the foundations of multipolarity, upholding fair approaches to the settlement of the Ukrainian, Palestinian, Israeli, and other acute crises, deepening cooperation with the countries of the world majority. We will work vigorously in favor of expanding the support base for our initiatives, aimed at building equal and indivisible security in Eurasia, countering colonialism in all its forms and manifestations, combating the glorification of Nazism, preventing the militarization of outer space, and much more. As part of the anniversary, the Russian side intends to pursue the thesis that world organizations, despite the increasingly frequent criticism, are one of the main achievements of the world community. It remains an uncontested and time-tested backbone center, or, well, one might say, such a core of global architecture, the most effective mechanism for harmonizing interests in the state of finding answers to the challenges of our time. We all need to preserve and strengthen this common heritage of humanity, resolutely defend the imperative of observing the principles of the Charter of the organization in their entirety, and interrelationship. And on September 30th in Sochi, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will take part in the 22nd annual meeting of the Valdai International Discussion Club. According to the established tradition, the discussion will bring together leading Russian and foreign experts. At the meeting with them, the Russian foreign minister will assess the current situation in the world and explain key Russian foreign policy initiatives, as well as answer questions from participants. Separate bilateral and trilateral meetings of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation Sergei Lavrov, with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Abkhazia and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of South Ossetia, will be held there in Sochi on the 1st of October. Let me remind you that the previous time in this format, the heads of the diplomatic departments of the three states gathered on the 4th of October last 24th year in Moscow. During the separate negotiations, topical issues of bilateral relations will be considered, as well as updated Russian-Abkhazian and Russian-Yugoslav plans for Meshmid consultations for the 25th and 26th years will be signed. And at the trilateral meeting, the ministers will discuss foreign policy issues of mutual interest, including cooperation in the framework of international discussions on security and stability in the Transcaucasia. Let's move on to the current international agenda. The situation around Ukraine. Kyiv. But the Nazi regime does not stop terrorist attacks against civilians and civilian objects. Over the past week, 115 Russian civilians suffered from shelling and strikes by enemy drones, of which 7 people were killed, 108 wounded, including 4 minors. More than 3,700 rounds of ammunition were fired at civilian targets. The number of daily strikes on civilian targets has reached 530. This is the maximum since the beginning of the year. Here are some facts of the crimes of the armed forces of Ukraine. And after all, look, in their reports, news, in their statements and interviews, the Kyiv regime is proud of this. He says that Western aid is not, so to speak, stagnating in warehouses and it is being used. Remember, every such report of the Kyiv regime is a confession of committing a terrorist act. Look, Belgorod region, the 11th of September. In 10 settlements of the region, Ukrainian drones killed a civilian. A 13-year-old girl was wounded. An 18-year-old girl was also wounded. 5 women and 8 men were overtaken by these drones. On the 12th, 13th of September in Belgorod, a civilian was killed by drone attacks. 6 people were injured, including 2 girls of 16 and 20 years old. On the same days, due to drone strikes, a man in the village of Proletarsky, a truck driver near the village of Nizhny Berezovo II, a woman in the village of Novaya Tavolzanka. 2 people were injured near the village of Dubino. September 15th, on the same day, in the village of Azazuli, a drone struck a service Gazelle. The driver and 7 women were injured. September 16th, the drone killed a civilian in the village of Zavo. Bryansk region, the 11th of September, drones at Sushny attacked a civilian car near the village of Polyanka. A civilian was wounded. September 12th, the UPU struck several blows on a passenger minibus on the highway in the Ogarsky district. During the evacuation of passengers from the damaged transport, the Ukranazis struck another blow, a blow aimed at them. They wounded 5 people and 2 volunteers who helped them. DNR, on the night of the 11th of September, the UFU, with the help of the already NATO Mlos HIMARS, fired at multi-story residential buildings located in the center of Donetsk and the Republican Center for Traumatology, Orthopedics, and Neurosurgery. What do you think? Did any of the Western sponsors of the Kyiv regime pay attention to this? No, they are only interested in themselves and those to whom they supply weapons. They don't think about anyone else, about any civilian population, about any children. Fortunately, there were no victims of the victims on the same day, in the village of Novotroitskoy, a boy 2010th year of birth, suffered from an explosive object dropped by an enemy drone. September 16th, a woman was killed and a man was wounded due to the detonation of ammunition in Donetsk, Zaporozhye region. The 11th of September, WAVs and Ukrainists again attacked the training center of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, and on the 12th of September, adjacent station's territory. On the same day, an unknown drone struck two school buses in the city of Vasylyevka. There were, thank God, no casualties. On September 16th, the Ukrainian armed forces shelled the area of fuel depots of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. This led to the ignition of dry grass. The fire was localized. On this day, the town of Vasilevka was again hit. As a result, a woman was injured and an Orthodox chapel was destroyed. Smolensk region, the 12th of September. The UPU attacked the Smolensk NPP with the help of a drone, which detonated near the ventilation pipe of the operating third power unit, after which windows were removed in some rooms. Kherson region from the 15th to the 16th of September. As a result of the shelling of the armed forces of Ukraine in the villages of Gornostaevka, Proletarka, 3 local residents were injured. On September 17th, an ambulance was struck in the town of Alyosha by the UPU. The driver and the doctor were injured. For all this, they will be punished, as they are being punished every day. Different punishments. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis. The militants of the terrorist battalion Aidar, Sergei Dzyuba and Denis Demyanenko, who were captured in the 24th year of the DPIE, were sentenced to 19 years of imprisonment. Bohdan Kravchenko of Azov received 19 years of imprisonment for crimes against civilians of Donbass. The commander of the armed forces of Ukraine, Viktor Rybalka, was sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia. He gave illegal orders in the 23rd year about mining settlements in the Kursk, Belgorod and Bryansk regions, as a result of which at least 13 people were injured and significant property damage was caused. He is on the international wanted list. And look, after all, the UPU is simply committing sabotage, terrorist acts of sabotage. On September 14th, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and Special Operations Forces anonymously reported through the publication Ukrainska Pravda on the organization of sabotage using explosive devices on separate railway stages in the Leningrad and Oral regions. On September 13th and 14th, on September 14th, in his daily video message, Zelensky not only reported on the involvement of the SBU in drone raids on objects of the Russian oil industry. He called these attacks direct quote, the most effective sanctions, but he also announced plans to launch new strikes on the port of Ust-Luga in the Leningrad region and other logistics points of entry into the world market. Again, his quote is the same words that were uttered by international terrorists branded with the West. How they screamed in the West when they only uttered such words aloud. When they opened correspondence, for example, of some militants and terrorists, when Western intelligence services became aware of planned sabotage and terrorist attacks of a similar nature, how they shouted, how they demanded to be punished, how they demanded to use all opportunities, how they created flying CIA prisons, how they filmed entire bases, like a Banton, and for that in order to protect themselves from international terrorists there. Today, the West has completely got into trouble and has been associated with international terrorism, whose face Zelensky, after all, is nothing more than the recognition of the leader of the Kyiv junta, that he personally directly participates in planning and gives orders to militants to carry out terrorist attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure facilities in Russia. Here, recently, some people who present themselves as victims, but this is to some extent, probably partly true, only deeply can make such statements. Flawed people remember Dudayev, the terrorist Dudayev, who wielded his hands from the West in the North Caucasus. So even Dudayev, I don't know what was enough, whether it's not about conscience to talk, Maybe there is intelligence or calculation. It's better to say, to dissociate himself from the dirtiest terrorist attacks carried out by his militants. After all, then they said that he did not know that Basayev planned and carried out a terrorist attack in Budynovsk. However, then Dudayev rewarded him for this terrorist attack. Here, Zelensky lacks even a direct calculation to dissociate ourselves in some way from these really real terrorist attacks against civilians. He flaunts it. He claims that he literally directs such operations every day. Well, as a matter of fact, he does it in order to account for the, so to speak, help that he receives. In fact, it's not help, it's blood money and bloody weapons that go to him from the West in order for him to fulfill his function. His mission that he was entrusted with being a weapon and a tool in the hands of the West against Russia. On the 12th of September, another anti-Russian Sabbath took place in Kyiv. The International Forum is the so-called Yalta European Strategy. The word, this abbreviation, sounds funny in English. It sounds like the U, that is, yes, 2025. It seems that Kyiv has once again agreed to everything that the Westerners offer them. European politicians took part. Who do you think were the guests of honor? The president of Finland, Stupa, the special representative of the US president for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, landed in Kyiv, and with Alina, the British landing, led by the sex prime minister, of course, Boris Johnson. This is one of the leaders of the war party, the newly appointed Minister of State of Britain, Cooper, advisor to the Prime Minister of Britain, Jonathan Powell, and the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, were also seen there, this time, in my opinion, without his wife. At least maybe I didn't see something. Zelensky, in his speech, predictably accused our country of allegedly unwillingness to stop the war, categorically rejected the thesis of the inevitability of territorial concessions, as he formulated for achieving peace, and called for increasing sanctions pressure on Russia. And how fondly I remembered the isolation of Russia. I will ask the United States for new supplies of air defense systems, combat aircraft, and other weapons. Well, I understand, of course, that when all television channels in Ukraine are destroyed in terms of their content diversity, only the one that was assigned directly to the Bank One remains, then it does not show what is happening in the world. You did not show the past commemorations of the end of World War II and the 80th anniversary, the end of this bloodshed parade in Beijing. The multilateral meetings were not shown, which were not held in China now, not in the format of the SCO summit, which was held in Tenzin, not BRICS events. Of course, all this is not shown in Ukraine either. Therefore, they believe in a kind of isolation of Russia. Funny. They would switch channels, but they only have one button. The troublemaker was quite expected to be the scandalous Boris Johnson, who, let me remind you, made it clear in April of the 22nd year that London was interested in delaying the escalation of the conflict. Speaking at this forum, and then communicating with local journalists, he rebuked the European Union. What did he reproach? Undecided. He called on Brussels to send troops to Ukraine, expropriate frozen Russian assets, and transfer them to the Kyiv regime as an advance payment for reparations. Imagine what an alliance, what a fantastic terrarium of like-minded people. These are those who call each other in solidarity, like Boris Johnson, whose country just recently left the European Union with a scandal, pushes those who remain in the European Union to direct suicide. They left the EU themselves. Now it turns out that the EU needs to be invaded and pushed to some kind of catastrophe, so that Britain does not look so deplorable against this background. The key moment of the meeting was Boris Johnson's skirmish with Alexander Stupa, who tried to land the British, and encouraged him to listen to the opinion of Europeans that Ukraine's security guarantees are its integration into the European Union, and not the withdrawal of Russian funds blocked in the EU countries. Let me remind you that this is a real guarantee of security for Ukraine. This is the return of its rightful documents that framed its independence, sovereignty, and statehood. It prescribes a nuclear-free neutral status, the non-aligned status of Ukraine. These are its security guarantees. What she prescribed for herself when she assumed obligations to live according to international law, to be a truly sovereign, independent state, and pursue a peaceful policy. So let's go back to this very skirmish between Johnson and Stubb. Behind such arguments of the Finnish leader, there is a contradiction in the approaches of London and Brussels to the situation around Ukraine. Libra is clearly looking for ways to negotiate with Washington, minimize its own British costs of the conflict, and bring it into a semi-frozen format, and hang all this on the European Union. On Albion, on the contrary, they want to literally continue playing the war card for a long time, and on their own terms. And they seem to agree that Britain and European countries in general, and London and Brussels want to hang all this on the citizens of the European Union. This is their point of coincidence. Contrary to the despair and desires of their own citizens, I mean the European Union. Apparently this fate is prepared by their political regimes. Apparently, the British, as they say, message conveyed to Bankova by London guests, including Prince Harry, who came there for some reason, inspired Zelensky, who has recently noted a number of remarkable statements. Look, on September 16th, in an interview with Sky News, he said, direct quote, Europe and the USA need to stop thinking about themselves and their future relations with Russia, and think more about Ukraine, because this is a question of today. Every day their trade with Russia, the discussion of the question of who and what anti-Russian sanctions are leading, costs us, that is, Ukraine, a lot of lives. It's not fair. Wow. And why on earth did Zelensky come up with the idea that the West, in principle, knows how to think about someone else? It was only Exupery's idea that we were responsible for those who were tamed. And in life in the West, this principle does not work. It works from the reverse. They are never responsible for those who have been tamed. And in the case of Zelensky, they beckoned and promised everything. History is a good example of this. And against this background, the words of Columbia University professor Jeffrey Sachs drew attention. He said that during the presentation of the Legion of Honor to him, French President Macron privately acknowledged the guilt of NATO for unleashing the war in Ukraine. And these very revelations of the American on September 13th were brought on their pages by the journalists of the Italian edition, and Fatou Koti Diana. We will definitely post a link to this material in the text of today's briefing. All this is going on. All this is this whole infernal polemical fervor. It goes against the background of arms supplies. On September 9th, as part of the Defense Security Equipment International Arms Exhibition held in London, the head of the German concern Rheinmetall, Armin Paperger, announced a contract for €500 million for the deployment of new Sky Ranger short-range air defense systems to the Kyiv regime. In turn, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Shmyhal, announced on September 11th that Kyiv had allocated a plot of land for the construction of a plant for the production of shells for Rheinmetall. On September 11th, the Swedish government announced its decision to send Ukraine the 20th package of military assistance in the amount of about, almost $1 billion, $980 million, but it includes long-range drones, Archer self-propelled artillery installations, shore-based radar stations, and other military products. They will also say that they are not involved, that they are not participants in the conflict, that they do not understand what is happening on the territory of Europe at all. No, the total amount of Stockholm's military assistance to the Zelensky regime, the Zelensky terrorist regime, since the 22nd year, it has amounted to about $9 billion, of Swedish taxpayers' funds. And this is against the background of their economic situation. Western investments in the torn pockets of the Kyiv regime are fueling its appetites. On September 14th, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine Shmyhal said that in the event of a continuation of the conflict, the country's military budget in the 26th year should be doubled to 120 billion normal appetites. Right. If the fighting ends, then military expenditures should not be significantly less than this amount in order to replenish supplies and maintain the army of Ukraine, direct quote, in proper condition. We know that it will be necessary to support Sniffer and this whole company with their own inhuman needs, which have reached a real passion and mania. Moreover, this amount does not include multi-billion-dollar assistance from Western sponsors. In unison with Shmyhal, the chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, NATO, said that one day of full-scale hostilities costs Kyiv $172 million. One day, $172 million. In general, can you imagine how much Ukraine could create with this money if she had not been led to persuasion, to these sweet-voiced speeches of British and other Anglo-Saxon sirens? But another thing is that who would give them this money if it was necessary to develop a peaceful Ukraine? This money is given in order to destroy Ukraine. According to media reports, in the 24th year, this figure was $142 million. Well, and see what is happening in the inner contour of Ukraine. According to the information published there, in Ukraine, since the 22nd year, the Special Services and the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine have initiated more than 70,000 politicized criminal cases against Russian citizens, against persons who support a special military operation. That is, every day, including weekends, 55 new cases are opened. I want to draw your attention once again, not in connection with thefts or corruption in Ukraine, not in connection with, I don't know, any suspicions of illegal actions related to the improper operation of facilities and so on. And it's not all about non-payment of taxes and not about the implementation of laws there. I do not know about land and so on. It's all politicized. The set of fabricated accusations is standard from espionage to terrorism, propaganda of war, war crimes, genocide, in other words, all those acts that the Kyiv regime itself was convicted of committing in the first place. After all, there are numerous real proofs of this. There are statistics of the State Bureau of Investigation of Ukraine itself about the scale of repression of the Zelensky gang. To date, he has initiated 2,758 criminal cases under the Articles of Treason and Aiding the Enemy. 1,591 of them are against law enforcement officers, 121 military personnel, 51 representatives of the judiciary, 10 people's deputies, 985 civilians of Ukraine. The Bandera people who have usurped power in Kyiv are fighting even with young children. We talk about it all the time. They do it in different ways. Mines are a petal that they scatter among peaceful civilians, just children's objects, kindergartens, schools, hospitals. They do it in such a way that even experienced people are in shock. Look, now the media have found out that 7 children from Russia, aged from 2 to 9 years old, have been entered into the database of the extremist website Peacemaker. The direct quote of an attempt on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine is changing for the kids. Deliberate violation of the state border in order to enter the occupied territory. Actions aimed at legalizing the seizure and occupation of Ukraine, support for aggression, and murder of Ukrainian citizens. Is it okay? What kind of neo-Nazi lunatics are these? How can a 2-year-old child knowingly cross the border? How can a 2-year-old child plan an assassination attempt like a 2-year-old? Forgive me, maybe something without the assistance of an adult. These facts confirm And much of what we are going to talk about today confirms the relevance of the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. As the Russian leadership has repeatedly stated, all of them will be fulfilled. Now about the situation in Moldova. There are 10 days left until the parliamentary elections, which will be held on September 28th. We see that the country's authorities, in an attempt to win, as they say, victory at any cost, continue to escalate anti-Russian hysteria. On September 9th, President Sandu, speaking at the plenary session of the European Parliament, accused Russia of trying to bribe Moldovan voters. What evidence, Ms. Sandu, did you give to the European Parliament? And I will tell you that on September 12th, through Moldova, the Prian distributed an appeal in which it tried to justify the opening of only 2 polling stations on the territory of Russia, where the Moldovan diaspora of many thousands lives. The reason is allegedly a direct quote from this document, as it were, in the deterioration of the situation in the field of security, of course, in Russia. And also a direct quote, "It is impossible to guarantee the safety of both voters and staff." End quote. This, of course, is a lie. There are no problems with ensuring the security of voting of Moldovans living in Russia. We are ready to provide all necessary assistance in organizing the elections. It's just that official Chisinau doesn't need it. Moreover, look at how they change the laws there. Yes, every day, whatever, Moldovans are called Romanians. And the Moldovan language is Romanian. They renamed it Romanian, although I don't even know how to say and come up with such a thing. In other words, there are no problems with changing the laws. So, probably, it would be possible to adjust the legislation. If an ambulance opens to polling stations, well, it's not safe for them anymore. Well, put more of you here on these very sections of the ballots. But even this thought did not occur to them. Why? Yes, not because there is some imaginary threat to the security of Moldovan voters in Russia, and not because they cannot adjust the legislation in such a way that the constitutional rights of the citizens of Ukraine can be provided to everyone. No, but because the order is different. We need to make these people, that is, Moldovans who are on the territory of Russia, want to build relations with Russia, so that their opinion is simply not taken into account, so that their voice is not heard, so that they are deprived even of this right, and with the rest of the rights. And so they plan to sort it out. The reason for such attacks against Russia is clear. The Moldovan authorities see what their incompetent anti-people policy leads to, and try to absolve themselves of responsibility. Come up with at least something. During the rule of the Action and Solidarity Party, Moldova's public debt exceeded $7 billion, and the level of absolute poverty rose to 33.6%. Maybe some document will be distributed on this occasion at the United Nations. There are also profile committees there. According to open sources, the only area in which the Moldovan authorities have succeeded, overtaking European partners, is the shadow economy. Here there is something to demonstrate in the form of growth. Its level has reached 37.1% of GDP. Of course, it is not surprising that the majority of Moldovans condemn the course of the country's leadership, which seriously fears for the outcome of the upcoming vote, and is doing everything to hold this vote in isolation from the constitution of Moldova. According to experts, the way out in Chisinau is seen in the continuation of political repression against political opponents, preparing the ground for large-scale falsifications. Do you want examples? Unlike Sandu, who spoke in the European Parliament without facts, I have these facts. According to the SEC of Moldova, the total number of the Moldovan electorate allegedly amounts to as many as 3/10 people, of which 2.7 million are registered on the legal excuse, registered from the point of view of it being done from the point of view of legislation on the right bank of the Dniester. At the same time, according to the results of the population census of the 24th year, a little more than as many as 4/10 million people lived on the right bank of the Dniester, of which as many as 9/10 million have the right to vote. I repeat, The SEC of Moldova speaks of to as many as 0.7 voters, and according to the census, there are almost 1 million fewer of them. That's a fact. The Moldovan authorities continue to persecute politicians and public figures who advocate, for example, normalization of relations with Russia. They went through the independent media like a skating rink. Searches are being conducted in their official living quarters. The pretext is an alleged anti-corruption investigation. But with this pretext, it is probably necessary to start a conversation and check all members of the government in Moldova. They receive anonymous messages. I mean independent journalists. They are threatened with physical violence. The main thing is that they want to get them to reject their views. Against the background of falling electoral ratings, official Chisinau is trying, well, literally to appease Moldovans from different segments of the population. In September of this year, for example, payments to school children began. In the midst of the election race, it was decided to allocate compensation to farmers for damage from bad weather. At the stage of discussion, there is a project to increase the salaries of employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. In the 26th year, political scientists point out that this has a clear definition. This is what is called electoral corruption. Judging by the polls, Moldovans have no illusion that the authorities will play fair in the upcoming elections. In the memory of Moldovans, there are fresh memories of last year's presidential elections, which Sandu lost inside Moldova and won literally at the last moment. Thanks to the foreign diaspora, she gave her almost 30% of the votes. Well, as a matter of fact, that's why polling stations abroad are distributed in this way. There is a growing protest in Moldovan society against the anti-people policy that ignores the national interests of the republic and the opinion of the majority of its population. It would be logical for international structures, in particular the ODIHR, to pay attention to these other facts and trends. Although they said in their reports earlier that all this looks strange and smells bad, but as they say, the West does not make any lessons from this. It's a pity. The Balkans. There were many questions asking us to comment on the overall situation in certain regions. We tried to answer these questions comprehensively. The West has taken another step towards unleashing a new armed conflict in the Balkans, in a region that has not yet healed the wounds inflicted by the intraethnic clashes of the era of the Yugoslav crisis of the 90s, where, of course, a bloody hand from the West created lawlessness. In March, Croatia concluded a military alliance with Albania and the Serbian autonomous province of Kosovo and Metohija. In the development of the emerging alarming trend, an agreement was reached on September 5 to deepen defense cooperation with Zagreb and Ljubljana, and it is obvious that such a craftily stated desire by the participants to preserve peace and stability in southeastern Europe, primarily in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the self-proclaimed so-called "we take in quotation marks of the Republic of Kosovo," is nothing more than a plausible pretext for further escalation of explosive the atmosphere in the Balkans, is in the interests of Western capitals. Both agreements reflect the West's intentions to increase Pristina's weight in regional affairs, reinforce its claims to so-called international legal subjectivity, and accelerate the transformation of local security forces. Again, we take a full-fledged army in quotation marks by pumping weapons from NATO countries, providing access to financial instruments of the European Union, and launching our own military production in the region. These plans blatantly and grossly violate the provision of Annex 1B of the General Framework, what has been called the Dayton Peace Agreement, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Let me remind you that Croatia, in particular, is a party to this agreement. They run counter to the UN Security Council Resolution 1244, which confirms the territorial integrity of Serbia in relation to Kosovo, and even more so, does not allow the appearance of any military formations in the province, except for the international contingent to maintain security, the ultimate goal of these initiatives, which are based on the inherent Serbophobia of the West. Completely isolate Serbia, surround it with hostile forces, and, of course, literally bring matters to the point of forcing it to give up its ancestral lands, to give up sovereignty, and become an obedient link of the anti-Russian front, because the anti-Russian front is not only against Russia, but against how Russia helps, in particular Serbia, to defend absolutely legitimate interests. The legitimate interests of the Serbian people, are the legitimate interests of the Serbs, the legitimate interests of Serbia as a state, as generations who defended this land, defended it, and developed it. Although Belgrade is the only one among the Balkan states that stands for confidence building and the rejection of dividing lines, NATO members ignore legitimate Serbian interests. Such an escalation of tension in the post-conflict zone is fraught with serious consequences. Given the fragility of the situation on Earth, the West's activities to create new military blocs acquire a pronounced, subversive note. We are convinced that international efforts in the Balkans should be focused not on inciting contradictions between countries and peoples, but on ensuring the peaceful development of the region, encouraging constructive dialogue and mutual consideration of interests. Japan. The government of this country continues to put under the knife, with the persistence of worthy, of course, the best use, that little that remains of Russian-Japanese relations. On September 12, Tokyo adopted another 26th package of illegal restrictive measures against our country. At the same time, the introduction of so-called sanctions is cynically justified, direct quote, by the need to ensure a just and long-term peace in Ukraine. Such formulations are beyond the normal human understanding of any logic at all. The motives for including a list of public organizations, such as the Movement of the First, in the sanctions list cannot be explained. Then Tokyo, then Japan, then Artek prevented the Japanese. I want to ask. Yes, he didn't interfere with anything. They don't know how he could have prevented them. They were simply ordered to do so. And in the absence of independence, Tokyo is happy to try. Should it be understood that maybe in general, children interfere with Japan? But then that's the way to say it. There were also such pages on the Japan page when children from other countries interfered very much. We remember very well. We know, we read. We see what Japanese militarists and crazed, instigated Japanese soldiers did with Chinese children. You can't forget that. Of course, this step looks particularly strange in the execution of the current government of Japan, which has irrevocably drowned in its own internal problems. There is something to do inside Japanese society. Here, the Japanese ruling coalition has actually removed the prime minister from office after a series of unsuccessful parliamentary and regional elections, has finally become entangled in domestic political intricacies, and is trying to convince the Japanese people that they know what to do, and, of course, as usual, they are trying to play the Russian card for this. What does it have to do with Russia? Look for problems inside yourself. I would like to warn you that illegal so-called sanctions have never become a lifeline anywhere. They only led to further degradation of the situation in the country that drove them. This happened, by the way, through the efforts of the same Tokyo with Russian-Japanese ties. God knows with him it happened with Japan itself. And after all, it was the rupture of relations with our country in the economic sphere, the withdrawal of their companies thoughtlessly, absolutely not calculated, that led to monstrous economic costs, which accordingly affected the economy of this country. Japan's next unfriendly actions will not go unanswered, but our response will be thoughtful, based on national interests. We will continue to take adequate countermeasures, including of an asymmetric nature. Iran and the IAEA, on September 9th, as you know, negotiations between the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Director General of the IAEA took place in Cairo. During these negotiations, an agreement was concluded on the practical aspects of the application of safeguards in Iran, which allows to intensify cooperation between Tehran and the agency in this sensitive area. The encouraging results of the meeting stabilize and significantly change for the better the overall tense situation around the Iranian nuclear program. In this context, we note the consistent steps taken by the Iranian side aimed at putting the aforementioned agreement into effect, and consider its approval by the Supreme National Security Council of Iran as evidence of a responsible approach, and confirmation of Tehran's commitment to the agreements reached that meet its national interests and comply with the legislation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We count on the active and comprehensive support of the uninterrupted and systematic implementation of the CARE Agreement by the international community. This implies the creation of a constructive atmosphere for the practical promotion of Iran and the IAEA on the entire spectrum of agreed parameters of cooperation. This, of course, is an absolute priority, and in this situation, prudence and a far-sighted approach are required from Britain, Germany, and France, with their unlawful and provocative attempts to restore the previously cancelled, long-lost relevance of the sanctions against Tehran. These countries are creating a new serious crisis around the Iranian peaceful atom and undercut the agency's efforts to restore full-fledged verification activities in the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was disrupted, let me remind you, by the US-Israeli bombing in June of this year. We urge the European countries that are members of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to abandon confrontation and reconsider their erroneous line of action on the so-called snapback, as well as to prioritize the interests of nuclear non-proliferation, which dictated the Cairo Agreement between Iran and the IAEA. Important information for citizens of our country who travel abroad and then return to our country with children. Federal Law No. 114 of the 15th of August, 1996. The rules of departure from the Russian Federation and entry into the Russian Federation have been amended, according to which, I emphasize, from the 20th of January of the next 26th year, the birth certificate is excluded from the number of documents, according to which Russian citizens under the age of 14 have the right to travel to Abkhazia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and South Ossetia. As for entry into Russia under this document, after January 20th, again, of the next 26th year, it will remain only for those children who left abroad on their birth certificate before that date. Also, from January 20th of the 26th year, the possibility of issuing an entry certificate in the Russian consular offices on the territory of these countries is cancelled, that is, returning to the Russian Federation instead of a birth certificate, in case it is lost, has become unusable, or the child has reached the age of 14 years before staying abroad. At the same time, we inform you that Russia's international agreements with these countries, which provide for the possibility of entry, stay, and departure from their territory of Russian children under the age of 14 on a birth certificate, are still in effect. At the same time, work is underway to exclude birth certificates from the number of travel documents of Russian citizens, provided for by relevant agreements with foreign states. We ask you to take this information into account when planning trips to the mentioned countries, to issue a foreign passport to children in a timely manner. At the same time, we emphasize that a foreign passport can be issued to a child only on the basis of an application submitted personally by the legal representative of the child, that is, one of his parents, adoptive guardians, or trustees. You know, I will allow myself to supplement this very difficult text for perception with such a personal, maybe even say a personal remark. It is best to issue a foreign passport for children to travel abroad immediately. I myself found myself in such a situation without having read the subtleties of the legislation, planning a trip with a child under 14 years of age on a birth certificate. I was forced to make adjustments due to the need to present not a birth certificate when crossing the border, but a passport. In many cases, there are different nuances you need to read. No, therefore, it is most convenient and correct to immediately issue a foreign passport. It's just such a personal recommendation based on both my own experience and the experience of a huge number of people who face similar issues. Another topic is related to Russian-Azerbaijani relations. On September 23rd and 25th, the border patrol ship Rasul Gamzatov of the FSB of Russia will enter the port of Baku. The visit is carried out within the framework of the approved plans of bilateral cooperation. The visit program provides 4 contacts between the border services of Russia and Azerbaijan to discuss issues of bilateral cooperation, primarily in the Caspian Sea. The visit of our border guards to Baku testifies to the mutual intention to continue cooperation in the field of security and strengthen practical cooperation in the Caspian region. And the topic is related to history, and the history of the Second World War directly affects current international relations. Let me remind you that the troops of Nazi Germany captured the capital of Estonia on August 28, 1941, and for more than 3 years it existed under the occupation regime. Tallinn was of great strategic importance for the Third Reich. The control of the southern coast of the Gulf of Finland, of the islands of the Manzous archipelago, gave the Germans, I mean the representatives of the Third Reich, the opportunity in alliance with Finland to block the Soviet fleet, so to speak. A page specially dedicated to the President of Finland Stubu begins. During the German occupation, 61,000 civilians and 64,000 Soviet prisoners of war were killed on the territory of the country. Tallinn offensive operation of the Soviet troops. It was held from the 17th to the 26th of September 1944, was part of an extensive Baltic strategic offensive. The troops of 4 fronts took part in the liberation of the city at once, the Leningrad and the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Baltic fronts, thanks to careful preparation and a convenient springboard for the offensive. The entire operation took less than 10 days. Tallinn itself was released on the 22nd of September. Continuing to develop the offensive, the troops of the Leningrad front moved in a southwesterly direction and reached the Baltic Sea coast. In cooperation with the forces of the Baltic Fleet, Admiral Attribute commanded by the 26th of September. The entire mainland of Estonia was cleared of fascists. For the brilliant operation to liberate Tallinn, over 30 units and formations, including the 8th Estonian Rifle Corps, were awarded the honorary title of Tallinn. In September of the 24th year, the Russian Ministry of Defense posted declassified documents for the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the capital of Estonia by the Nazi invaders. A new historical section has been opened on the department's website. The liberated Tallinn was drowned in flowers, with unique documents from the fund of the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense of Russia. 20. Yes, of course, we will definitely duplicate all the references today in the text of the briefing. On September 22nd, 1944, the capital of Soviet Estonia was liberated from the Nazi invaders. As a result of the Tallinn operation, Red Army units knocked German troops out of strategic important lines within a week. In the modern Baltic states, the thesis is being promoted at the state level that after the liberation of the Red Army, one of them, as they came up with an occupation, replaced another. Despite the demonstrative attempts of today's Estonian authorities to rewrite history, to give oblivion to the feat of the Red Army soldiers, the real state of affairs is recorded in archival documents. They indicate that the liberators were met in Tallinn. Friendly, many residents of the Republic continue to perceive the date of liberation with deep trepidation. They do not forget that a great contribution to the overall victory was made by the wars of national formations, including the vanguard of the 8th Estonian Rifle Corps, which was one of the first to enter the liberated Tallinn. And our common duty is to preserve the truth about the heroic liberation mission of the Red Army, and to be worthy of the memory of heroes. And as soon as you hear from all sorts of pseudo-social figures who pose as champions of freedom, a kind of invented story about those events, just ask, and who liberated Tallinn? That's it. Well, And one more topic. In the context of the systematic work carried out by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of our country to preserve the memory of the feat of the Soviet soldier liberator, I would like to mention the opening of the 10th of September in the city of Dresden, landmark exhibitions of the work of the legendary Soviet military photographer Yevgeny Valdai, called Liberation. We are grateful to the organizer of this exhibition, dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the Great Victory, the German-Russian Institute of Culture in Dresden, and, of course, to its head Wolfgang Schlicki, the daughter of Eugene Hald, Anna Valdai, of course. We are grateful to all those who supported and helped to implement such a significant exhibition project in the conditions of progressive anti-Russian hysteria in Germany. And, of course, the most important coordinating role was played by the Russian embassy in Berlin. The exhibition presents both the well-known work of the master of Soviet photography, as well as less common photographs depicting the labor exploits and contribution of Soviet citizens to the restoration of post-war Germany. The very fact of holding this exhibition suggests that in modern Germany, despite the efforts of local authorities to reformat the historical assessments of the crimes committed by the Nazis, the genocide of the peoples of the USSR, there are brave public figures with an active civic position who consider it their duty to truthfully show the past. Yes, in spite of everything, in spite of any Burbach, Mertzev, and with them, there are anti-fascists in Germany, and the overwhelming, I am sure, overwhelming number of Germans, the very ones who, along with their ancestors, are anti-fascists. They suffered for Germany to be reborn so that it would never again become a victim of such madness, which seized it in the 30s and 40s. The vast majority of them are, of course, now waiting for what should happen. When Germany will return to the rails again, where it was determined by the denazification that took place after the Second World War. We wish the organizers of the exhibition success in this noble mission, and urge German journalists and politicians to just visit this exhibition. Do not be afraid. Look at the photo chronicles of those years. These are documents. These are not pseudo-historical pictures drawn by artists or animators. These are not invented stories of current German publications that are sponsored by Western grants. This is a living story. The real truth is yours. I appeal to the Germans, a story that needs to be known. And I'm sure it will help you think and rethink a lot. One announcement: the National Center of Historical Memory under the President of the Russian Federation, together with the Council of the Eurasian Women's Forum under the Federation Council, in preparation for the first International Forum of Women for the Preservation of Traditions, and it will be held in Moscow in the period from the 28th to the 29th of October, announced an international competition of the same name. Its purpose is to exchange experience and strengthen intercultural ties, preserve the popularization of traditions and values of different peoples. This competition is a platform to support women who preserve and develop the rich cultural heritage of their countries and regions, passing it from generation to generation. It takes place on the Russian social network Contact. It will last until the 10th of October of the 25th year, and the winners will be determined in 6 nominations. Traditional values around us, bridges of culture and international interaction, traditions of national culture, foundations of the future, women, Baregini, defenders of the fatherland, traditions and business, women's contribution and corporate dynasties, and loyalty to the profession. To participate in the competition, women need to tell about their family, professional or national traditions. The post must be accompanied by photos or videos, as well as the obligatory hashtag of a woman for preserving tradition. Foreign participants who do not have a Contact account can apply via the link, which we will also post in the text version of the briefing. By the way, the competition has already received applications and publications from compatriots and foreign citizens from a number of countries, in particular from Australia, Algeria, Armenia, Belarus, Belgium, Bulgaria, Vietnam, Egypt, Zambia, India, Iran, Canada, Kuwait, Malaysia, the Netherlands, Romania, the USA, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Turkey, Uzbekistan, France, Croatia, Montenegro, the Czech Republic and Ethiopia. And the best works, as the organizers say, will be presented at the International Forum Women Preserving Traditions. The partner of the competition is the Raz Molodez program More Than a Trip, which has prepared a special prize for each winner, a unique trip around Russia. Several important dates in international relations. On September 16th, the United Mexican States celebrated the 215th anniversary of the beginning of the struggle for independence. Let me remind you, 2810th year, Mexico is the only country in Latin America with which Russia has never, I apologize, just had. I wanted to say once had a common land border, and this, of course, Ford grew up. It was in the 19th century that the progressive development of our relations began, and the establishment of diplomatic relations became the crown of this process. Actually, the 135th anniversary of which we celebrate this year, and the date will fall on the 11th of December. Russian-Mexican cooperation is invariably based on a mutually respectful and equal dialogue, a basis. The key to this approach is the mutual sympathy of the peoples of our countries, a genuine interest in the culture, traditions, customs of the ethnic groups inhabiting them. And all this forms a solid foundation for maintaining and building up close trade and economic, scientific and academic, cultural and humanitarian ties. Regular and confidential political dialogue is the main direction of our cooperation. Its development is facilitated by the coincidence of the opposition of both countries on most issues of the global agenda, the proximity of approaches to solving key international problems. We share the need to preserve the central coordinating role of the United Nations in world affairs, upholding the principles of the sovereign equality of the state, not interfering in their internal affairs, and the right of peoples to self-determination. We are confident that, against the backdrop of ongoing turbulence in the world, Russian-Mexican relations will continue to develop steadily on a pragmatic, mutually beneficial and ideologized basis, and will continue to contribute to strengthening international security and strategic stability. Of course, we congratulate the entire Mexican people on the national holiday and express our sincere wishes for the well-being and prosperity of all the best. But today, on September 18th, the Republic of Chile celebrates the national holiday Independence Day. On this date, in 1810th year, the first government council was established in Santiago. This marked the beginning of the struggle of Chilean patriots against colonial oppression. It took years of heroic battles against the troops of the Spanish crown before the Chileans gained true sovereignty. The dedication and courage of the people of Chile contributed to the rise of the liberation movement throughout Latin America. This struggle vividly demonstrated the international solidarity of the countries of the region. Russia and Chile are bound by long-term relations of friendship and fruitful cooperation. Of particular importance is the memory of the Soviet Union's support of the Chilean government of national unity, headed, of course, by Salvador Allende in the 1970s-1973 years. During this period, the foundation of bilateral cooperation in various fields was laid, and this impetus for the formation of unique cultural and social ties between our peoples, which cannot be crossed out by opportunistic ideological dogmas, despite the pause in satisfied contacts that followed the military coup of 1973. Since the 90s, Russia and Chile have resumed full-format relations oriented towards the future. Mutually beneficial trade and economic cooperation has been developing. Cultural and humanitarian exchanges have been carried out. We note the important stimulating role of Chilean diplomacy in this process, of course. We remain open to the development of political dialogue, interparliamentary ties with Chile, strengthening and expanding multifaceted cooperation for the benefit of the peoples of our countries, confident in the great joint creative potential of Russia and Chile, and we see the guarantee of its implementation in mutual respect for national interests. justice, and goodwill. We congratulate the Chilean people on the national holiday. We wish you peace, prosperity, and prosperity. And on the 20th of September, the Republic of South Ossetia celebrates the national holiday, Republic Day 1990th year. In connection with this date, congratulatory messages from the leadership of the Russian Federation will traditionally be sent to the leadership of the Republic. A high-ranking Russian delegation will take part in the solemn events in the Valdai, as well as the South Ossetia Horizons Investments Economic Forum, timed to them. We are pleased to state that over these years, South Ossetia has achieved positive results in state building and socio-economic development. GDP is growing, living standards of the population are rising, important investment projects are being implemented, and international contacts are expanding. Russia is actively assisting these processes within the framework of the implementation of the fundamental bilateral documents, including the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Mutual Assistance of September 17, 2008 year, the Integration Alliance Agreement of March 18, 2015, as well as investment programs, contributes to the socio-economic development of South Ossetia. Of course, we heartily congratulate our South Ossetian friends. We wish you peace and prosperity. I wish you all the best, and am determined to continue joint productive work to strengthen the Russian-South Ossetia alliance in all directions. And on the 21st of September, Tbilisi celebrates the national holiday Independence Day. 44 years ago, the Belarusian people took a decisive step towards gaining independence, establishing an equal dialogue with foreign countries, including our country. Russian-Belarusian diplomatic relations have been going on for more than 30 years. They are traditionally characterized by mutual respect and readiness for constructive cooperation. These and other key principles are reflected in the third-party agreement on the foundations of relations of the 18th year, and we hope that his position will continue to serve as a solid foundation for the friendly nature of our relations and contribute to further deepening equal political dialogue, building up mutually beneficial trade, economic, cultural, and humanitarian cooperation. Russia considers the expansion of ties with Belize as a promising direction of its foreign policy in the Central American and Caribbean regions, interested in the long-term development of cooperation in the international arena, where our countries share approaches to solving a number of global issues based on the norms of international law. First of all, of course, the Charter of the United Nations. Congratulations to the citizens of Belize on the national holiday. We wish you well-being, prosperity, peace, and all the best. And the 22nd of September marks the 65th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence of the Republic of Malta. The 60th year. Bilateral relations are traditionally friendly, based on the principles of mutual respect, trust, and consideration of each other's interests. This was fully reaffirmed at the meeting of the leaders of the two states on June 23, during the official visit of the President of the Transitional Period of Mali to Russia. Our countries adhere to the voiced approaches to topical issues of the global, regional agenda, including the need to build a more equitable multipolar world order, rejection of neo-colonial approaches, double standards. There is effective coordination of actions, the practice of supporting each other's candidacies in the United Nations, in its structures. We highly appreciate the non-biased voting of Aliyah friends on anti-Russian initiatives, including the Ukrainian plot. At the United Nations General Assembly and other multilateral platforms, Moscow and Bamako are aimed at strengthening mutually beneficial cooperation in trade and economic investment spheres. On July 29th, Bamako was visited by a representative delegation of domestic departments and businesses, headed by the Minister of Energy of our country, Sergei Sivilev. The first meeting of the Intergovernmental Commission on Trade, Economic, Scientific and Technical Cooperation has been held, and we are pleased to state that as we gain combat experience, and largely thanks to the supply of Russian weapons and equipment, instructor assistance has been provided. The Malian Security Defense Forces are conducting successful operations against terrorist groups. Our country also continues to provide significant assistance to Bamako in the training of national personnel. In total, over 10,000 Malian specialists have been trained in domestic universities. The quota of Russian state scholarships for moles remains at a high level, 290 places. There is a working group on science education, and we are convinced that the multifaceted Russian-Malian ties will continue to develop for the benefit of the peoples of the two states, in the interests of strengthening peace and security on the African continent. Taking this opportunity, we would like to wish all the citizens of the Republic of Mali success, prosperity, and peace. And I am ready to answer your questions. Is the International Life magazine with us?
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, good afternoon.
The other day, the European Commission proposed to accelerate the phase-out of imports of Russian fossil fuels. This was stated by the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, after a telephone conversation with US President Donald Trump. And so von der Leyen said that after talking with Trump about strengthening joint actions, there is evidence of additional economic pressure on Russia. How would you comment on this situation, this statement?
You know, Brussels has consistently continued for many years, well, now we can say for many years, the destructive course for the economies of its own countries, the member states of the European Union, to curtail imports of Russian energy carriers. I think it looks like some kind of just, well, really self-mutilation. You know, the European Union is already suicidal on a permanent basis. Sanctions restrictions are being literally stamped out against the Russian fuel and energy complex. Price ceilings are being introduced, as they call it. Aggressive measures are being taken against the tanker fleet. Well, when they apparently realized that it would not be possible to achieve the complete displacement of Russian energy carriers from the EU market by market methods or under the guise of market methods, the European Commission decided to act like this in a directive, legislative way, forcing member countries to refuse to purchase Russian raw materials. Lord, I think that those who invented, organized, and put the European Economic Council on its feet could not even imagine in their thoughts what this structure would degenerate into. Starting this very economic operation in the vastness of Western Europe, receiving a resource base from the Soviet Union, the Founding Fathers certainly imagined a completely different goal setting for their structure than what it was turned into by those who do not need European prosperity. Here's a look at what those who destroy the established foundations of the European Economic Council are doing. In March, a corresponding roadmap was presented to force the abandonment of resources, and in June, in its development, there is a draft regulation according to which the EU capitals must necessarily be a team story, I mean a team of administrative coercion. We must abandon Russian gas and oil by the end of the 27th year. You know, all the countries have been thinking all their lives about where to find resources, how to get them more profitable, how to spend less on their extraction, how to reduce the costs of their transportation, how to improve the quality of the extracted resources, how to approach the issue of their safety. And suddenly something unprecedented happens in the world. Those who call themselves civilized, those who are proud of the traditions of their education and their culture, including, first of all, in the legal and economic sphere, demonstrate the miracles of suicide. They are abandoning the resource base, driving themselves to complete exhaustion, while pressing the gas pedal in the field of militarization. Such a zeal of the European Union for self-mutilation in the energy sphere cannot but raise questions as to whose interests Brussels actually serves. What are the interests of European citizens? Any business interests? No, of course not. They serve the interests of overseas suppliers, and not to their advantage, but to their detriment. In the EU, and so everywhere, there are interruptions with, I don't know, energy supply. Enterprises operating in energy-intensive high-tech industries are closing or flowing abroad. This has always been a special article of pride of the European leaders of their industry. Now they don't lose it. They refuse it themselves. It's as if they don't need it. The problem of energy poverty has significantly worsened. The general level of well-being of citizens has decreased, and further progress on this suicide. But I emphasize once again that it will lead to even more serious consequences. This is the case when the thoughtless policy of Brussels serves as no less punishment for the EU countries than our retaliatory measures.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is the news with us? Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Trump appointed you sanctions against Moscow insufficiently tough, noting that they continue to buy Russian oil. And the US is ready to tighten measures against Russia. But first the EU must bring them in line. Tell me, how does Russia assess these statements, and what steps will Russia take in response to the possible strengthening of sanctions? Well, it seems to me that I have already answered this question to such a large extent by providing comments on the question of your colleague from International Life. I can add that sanctions threats from Washington and Brussels against Russia are regularly heard in principle. They do not change anything and will not change anything. We will continue to implement the foreign policy agenda on our own. We will develop our economy. We will build a trade partnership with friendly countries. We will use this situation for our own good. We will benefit even because of what they think should go to our detriment. We have learned how to do it. Yes, not everyone can do it, but we have all the opportunities, and we took advantage of them. Russia continues to be an important participant in the global energy market. Our country has traditionally made a significant contribution to ensuring global energy security in the interests of peaceful development of states, stable and, I emphasize, reliable supplies of domestic energy resources, allow countries to ensure sustainable economic growth and the fulfillment of social tasks to fight energy poverty. Deepening energy cooperation with our closest traditional partners remains an absolute priority for Russia. Unfortunately, in general, the European Union was also among the traditional partners. Our energy cooperation has been going on for many decades, for more than half a century. But they excluded themselves from this list. But accordingly, we are now talking about, first of all, the EU, the CIS, the BRICS, the SCO. Friendly states account for over 90% of Russia's energy exports. It is significant that despite the obviously anti-Russian course taken, the European Union currently remains a major buyer of domestic raw materials, albeit with declining volumes. But still these are statistics. Look, the Western edition took time. It refers to the data of Eurostat. In the first half of the 25th year, the countries of the bloc imported Russian oil worth €4.5 billion. This exceeds the figures of the same period last year, and it amounted to €3.5 billion. As for the appeals of the United States and the US President to Europe, or to Western Europe, should I say, refuse to buy Russian oil, well, that's right. He acts based on the interests of his country. When President Trump came to power, he did not promise to make Europe rich. He did not promise to make Europe great. He did not promise to return greatness, prosperity, and wealth to Europe. He was saying all this in the context of his country, the United States of America. Therefore, he will use every opportunity to throw the competitor away, so to speak, in this competitive race. Here, too, everything is clear. And, by the way, in my opinion, this is always the logic of Washington's economic goals. But it is implemented in different ways and presented in different ways. I mean, there are different ways to make these statements. There are different ways to explain it all. The US has always been interested in monopolizing the European energy market in order to sell its own, emphasizing more expensive oil. Washington remains the winner because in this very situation, Western Europe's inability to defend its independence, of course, in this competitive struggle of Washington, of the European Union, in this case, Washington has an advantage, since it will expand oil exports to Europe and at the same time weaken European industry, contributing to the relocation of production to the United States. And why is Brussels reacting like this? So there are probably American henchmen standing there. There are those who fill their pockets like Ursula Flynn, who absolutely does not care what happens to the countries of the European Union. She serves the interests of exactly the wrong people who delegated her, that is, not Germany. How could you comment on the massive Israeli offensive on Gaza that began on September 16th? Israel's stated goal is to establish full control, as you have probably read, over Gaza, to destroy the remaining Hamas detachments there, against the background of massive rocket and bomb attacks on this area that have been going on for a long time. Now tank units have been transferred to the combat zone. All this provoked panic among the local population, which remained in the city. It is slightly less than 1 million people. We see terrible images of disasters of people, ordinary citizens, children, women. I do not know whether it is worth dividing these categories there. It is monstrous what is happening to the peaceful civilian population of Gaza. We view this decision of the Israeli leadership through the prism of its recent policy of increasing the scale and intensity of the military operation in the Gaza Strip. The consequences of such a step are of concern, serious concern, and not obvious. It will lead to new victims among civilians, and to further aggravate the already catastrophic humanitarian situation. Along with the recent Padoki airstrike, a new round of escalation in Gaza may indicate Israel's plans to resolve. To be honest, I don't want to say it, but by the way they act, this is just an incredibly cynical and incredibly terrible action to solve the problem of how gases are formulated by force there. This indicates that there is no intention to return to the negotiating table, and this will lead to even more civilian casualties. We reaffirm our unwavering position on the need to intensify the efforts of all interested parties aimed at an early ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, the release of hostages, detained persons, as well as ensuring unhindered humanitarian access to all those in need. We are firmly convinced that there are no alternatives to solving the Palestinian problem on a well-known international legal basis. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is the TV channel Rush Today with us?
Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
What is the position in Moscow regarding the proposal of some European countries to impose restrictions on the site of visas for Russian citizens? And if I may, I have a second question. How does Moscow feel about the sixth meeting with representatives of Armenia and Turkey on normalization of relations between Armenia and Turkey that took place in Yerevan on September 12th?
Let's start with the first one, about the European Union's restrictions on movement for its citizens. You know, let me just remind you, it was the concept of the Western community that freedom of movement is a fundamental universal value. The protection of this value has traditionally found wide support in the EU member states, which ardently, in words, really advocated for the observance of human rights and freedoms around the world, and consolidated it in large numbers documents. The fundamental principle is one of the four freedoms, I also remind you, along with the freedom of movement of goods, services and capital, which are directly at the heart of the European integration project. What is left of this? Look at the free movement of goods after restrictive measures of illegal sanctions, all kinds of restrictions. Nothing is left of this. What else was there? Free movement of services. What kind of free movement services are you currently observing when even planes cannot cross the airspace of Western Europe, the European Union, because they have imposed restrictions on sanctions illegal against our country? Capital is ridiculous. They gave a standing ovation to the disconnection of Russia from international payment and currency payment systems. They do everything to steal accounts. I do not know the money from the accounts. And what does this mean? It means just absolute, not even blocking, but destroying free exchange or free movement of capital. There remained, it seems, the free movement of people who were included. I mean, this freedom was included along with the three above, in this very basic package of their ideas about freedom, and that they have done everything to prevent citizens of our country, citizens of Belarus, from visiting for many years. Not only that, I am now listing only a few countries, but please Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Moreover, they did it with respect to all states. And then they also chose individual regions, just individual residents. We did everything to restrict movement and use visas, and use our leverage to put political pressure on people, segregate them, and pursue our agenda. Moreover, ensuring freedom of movement is one of the commitments made by the members of the European Union within the framework of the OSCE. I would like to emphasize once again that they have, in fact, always acted with this initiative. Thus, the ideas generated within the European Union to introduce restrictive measures in the visa sphere are another example of hypocrisy, double standards, and, most importantly, disrespect for the law. You citizens are trying to position themselves as the main global symbol of humanism democracy. In words, they defend the observance of international law, human rights and freedoms, but immediately forget about them when it comes to, I don't know, a specific situation. For example, Russia, Belarus. I can list many other countries. Such discriminatory measures are another element of the hybrid war unleashed by Brussels, promoted by the culture of the abolition of all Russian, all that they do not consider themselves under control. Here is everything that does not obey there will automatically. Everything is subjected to a similar attitude. It is obvious that the appearance in the European Union of such odious and so absurd ideas that cause rejection, even the participation of its member countries, testifies to the finally exhausted imagination of European officials when developing new restrictive measures against Russia. 18 so-called packages, so-called sanctions, did not achieve the goals set by the EU. In fact, they could not or achieved exactly the opposite. They wanted to make it worse for us, they made it worse for themselves. Apparently, there are no new ideas of the Wesovites. The main thing for them is a neglected one, that in itself is the idea of Russophobia, a sanctions roulette that continues to rotate. This process in itself is, apparently, valuable in itself for the European Union, that is, maintaining this anti-Russian spirit of Russophobia, this endless intimidation of Russia's own citizens. This is the goal. For our part, we do not plan to close borders for European citizens or restrict their entry by any political measures in any way. We believe that human contacts, tourism, business and humanitarian ties should be preserved. Our country is interested in building bridges between people, despite all the efforts within the European Union to destroy these bridges, which they really want. But this is not part of our plans. Yes, and you had a second question, remind me.
Yes, regarding the normalization of relations between Armenia and Turkey, and the sixth.
Let me remind you that.
A special representative.
Thank you, Russia. The Russian side always stands for the speedy reconciliation of the two neighboring states. I think you remember how many times our country and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov personally took part in international meetings on this topic. And in general, it is not by chance that the first round of the Armenian-Turkish negotiations has now taken place. I mean, at the current stage in recent years, it took place on January 14th of the 22nd year in Moscow. We consider the normalization of relations between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Turkey as one of the prerequisites for restoring lasting peace and ensuring sustainable development in the South Caucasus. And we are ready to further support the efforts of the Armenian and Turkish partners in this direction, including within the framework of the 3+3 regional cooperation platform. Let me remind you, it includes Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia plus Russia, Iran and Turkey. We hope that when developing agreements between Ankara and Yerevan, the realities on Earth, and the long-term interests of neighbors in the South Caucasus will be duly taken into account. To do this, it is important to exclude destructive interference outside of regional players in the already difficult negotiation process.
Thank you.
Thank you. The tape is with us. Ru.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Colleagues. Actually, I have the following question. Military exercises West 2025 took place recently, and according to the Belarusian Defense Ministry, military diplomats from 17 countries, including NATO countries, were present at the maneuvers. Here is how the Russian Foreign Ministry can comment on the presence of the American military attaché at the maneuvers of the past.
As you know, as for the form of conducting military exercises, this is, of course, the competence of the Ministry of Defense of our country. I think it is logical to address this question to the Ministry of Defense, which together with its Belarusian colleagues, organized and conducted the aforementioned exercises. As for the competence of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, I want to remind you that Belarus is our closest strategic ally, with whom we jointly provide reliable protection of the common defense space of our Union state, and, as has been repeatedly emphasized, the past exercises of violence, exclusively defensive in nature, were aimed at working out scenarios for repelling potential aggression against the Union state. And, of course, I want to believe that the participation of observers from NATO countries will help them, first of all, to debunk the myth persistently inflated by Western propaganda about the aggressive nature of the doctrine about the growth of military threats allegedly from our states. They also came up with the idea that Russia and Belarus threaten the eastern flank of NATO. Well, in general, all this nonsense, to be honest, I don't even want to repeat it. Well, let them look with their own eyes. If you have no more questions, then go ahead. Is Reuter with us?
And Vladimirovna is kind.
Yes, hello.
We are with you, and we have, in my opinion, 2 questions today. The first of them is a request for comment on the report of the School of Healthcare, which was released on Tuesday, and which claims about allegedly 210 institutions existing on the territory of Russia, where Ukrainian children are allegedly subjected to forced re-education, handling weapons, military training and drone assembly and so on. Have you seen a similar report? And, accordingly, how could you comment on it?
Well, it's just impossible to comment on everything without a smile, but she's like that, you know, with a touch of sadness. It's a smile. Because imagine if a higher educational institution, and the Yelskaya School is still, so to speak, an institution that claims to have some kind of reputation, if they produce such Britney, then, of course, I have big questions. Let's start with these 210 institutions. I just don't know. I haven't seen this fragment in detail. 210 institutions are named in some way. Addresses, that is. If there are addresses, well, let's go. Let's invite a representative of the School of Healthcare, so to speak, for a ride. We can, by the way, arrange some online meetings. Well, if it's true, there are addresses of these 210 institutions in which Ukrainian children are allegedly tortured. Then I really like the phrase you said, they are trained, or how to handle weapons, and learn how to handle weapons. I'm not sure that with the current degree of Russophobia, you know, any training courses on how to peel an apple or how to cut a cucumber will not be presented as a training course on handling cold weapons, for example. Well, here it is too, but let's move on to the texture now. What I saw in this report mentions 35,000, imagine, Ukrainian children that Russia allegedly abducted. You know, we saw different figures. They reached up to 1 million. You see, now there are 35,000, it turns out, children. These are fake fabrications. And it is a pity that the name was not disdained by the Yeisk School of Healthcare. I must say that this is probably some kind of scientific discovery, because the latest data from Bankova, which are promoted by Kiev regime diplomats, representatives, officials. That's 20,000, but apparently the Yelskaya School of Healthcare found 15 more somewhere. Where are these plus 15? Who are they? I do not know if they have names, surnames, passport data. I say again before that there were 100,000, before that there were 1,000,000. In principle, any figure can now be taken from the ceiling, because no one bothers to provide any facts, and no one bears any responsibility. It used to be said that this is a blow to reputation. Now it seems to me that for Western public media organizations, apparently even such a concept does not exist. Let's deal with the real facts. The Ukrainian side has never even tried to confirm its accusations with facts, names, or passport data. The only list in the entire history of this issue that Kyiv handed over to the Russian side was the list sent by the Russian delegation during the negotiations. And so, personally, Istanbul on the 2nd of June, 2025 year, 339 surnames were indicated there. When this list was checked and clarified, it turned out to be not entirely reliable. Many of the children included in it have never been to the territory of our country. They came of age, they returned to their families. There were various examples that even these 339 surnames that we carefully studied were not indicated as reliable data. But it doesn't matter. We will proceed from the fact that this list of 339 names he sounded, but the difference is between the number 339 and the number 20,000, 35,000, 100,000, 1,000,000. I say again, there are similar problems in every country, and with each country, the state or this or that body is dealt with specifically by last names, which is what we are doing. The same story is with this report. The way the so-called data is collected for this kind of reports, as well as a certain scientific objectivity, in particular of the University of Yelsk, which is a division of the mentioned School of Healthcare, unfortunately, now raises a lot of questions. In addition to fabricating anti-Russian reports, and of course, the indication of such figures is fabricated data. Yale University specializes in developing, as they wrote, the legal grounds for the seizure of Russian assets illegally held by Western countries, in order to use them to finance the armed forces of Ukraine. In other words, it seems that there is a comprehensive order placed there not for scientific research, but for anti-scientific propaganda. Let me remind you that the activities of the Yale University have been recognized as undesirable on the territory of our country by the decision of the Prosecutor General's Office of Russia. But, as they say, write and ask, and send more materials, regardless of who and how recognized by one or another organization of the institution, and so on. We are ready to deal with every fact. If you have data on what kind of 210 educational institutions these are, what kind of surnames they are, we do not refuse. We will deal with all the facts. This is really a priority for us. I know our colleagues. I know those who deal with the problem of children. We are in close contact with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, working with the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights and the Rights of the Child. Problems with children exist in different countries are different. This is no exception to the rule. Unfortunately, now with so many movements, with so many joint marriages, with such global logistics, the situation can affect any corner of our planet, which is what is happening. Therefore, for each situation with children, we are ready to work out. Provide the data, we will check them, and so on, and so on. You said that you still have a second question.
Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna. You have already partially answered the second question. when your colleague asked you about the presence of American observers at the exercises of the West 2025, but perhaps you can touch on it in a slightly different context. Do you read the presence of observers at these exercises as evidence of the warming of relations between Washington and Minsk, and how Moscow perceives the warming of relations with the United States from its strategic ally in the Union State?
And all the same, issues that relate to the relationship between two sovereign states should be commented on by representatives of these states. We hope that the participation of observers from the United States will help them unbiasedly, not through the prism of myths created, unfortunately, by themselves in the media. Let them look at the nature of the exercises conducted by the West 2025 are not engaged here just in, so to speak, through binoculars or directly with their own eyes, and once again I say not through the TV screen. Let them try to understand that these exercises were exclusively defensive in nature, were aimed at working out scenarios for repelling potential aggression against the Union State, that these exercises did not create any risks or military threats from our side against the so-called eastern flank of NATO. We have repeatedly stated this and, by the way, have always stressed it.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on. Is Bolt News with us? Yes. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. The Lithuanian authorities have banned ex-Pushkin of Gagauzia and the head of the Heart of Moldova party, Irina Vla, from entering the country for 5 years. She was accused of facilitating Russia's interference in the democratic processes and internal affairs of Moldova. What do you think this step is tied to? A popular politician, a participant in last year's presidential election campaign, is the leader of a party that is part of the opposition Patriotic Electoral Bloc, and there is no doubt that Lithuania's decision is one of the elements of the support of the European Union and its state members for the dirty anti-democratic struggle that the Chisinau regime is waging with all political opponents. We talk about it all the time, and here is a concrete example of this very struggle with its opponents, which the Sandu regime made just an idea of fixing its rule. In Moldova itself, it is openly said that the inability to win a fair fight in the parliamentary elections on September 28 forces the Moldovan authorities to literally use repression against their competitors, against the opposition. All methods are used: blackmail, intimidation, searches, arrests, and blocking of funds and information companies. The Western sponsors of the Moldovan leadership also resort to international pressure, to various international such combinations. At the end of August, sanctions against Irina Alla led, let me remind Canada, Lithuania has done it now. But well, you understand perfectly well that this is not, so to speak, it is not part of any practical measures that will change. For example, the position of a person who has been defending important things for himself for many years. But it creates information noise, it creates a negative agenda, among other things. This is of course an act of intimidation of opponents. This is a demonstration of what, for example, Western countries will do to Moldovans at the behest, by order. If these Moldovans go against the mainstream, which should again implement Sandu in Moldova with Western money, such actions of both Chisinau and the West have, we see, just the opposite effect. They lead to an increase in the popularity of those politicians whom they are trying to destroy. As soon as they start hitting those who, so to speak, declare the protection of national interests, as if you understand, there is a wave of Moldovan society trying to support, protect, and fight injustice. We are sure that the Moldovan people are hardworking and peaceful, knowledgeable, remembering their history, not giving up their faith. All of this will stand, all this will be rebuffed. I sincerely believe that. I know how Moldovans love their country. With what a soul, with what sincerity they love their nature. How they historically defended everything that their ancestors bequeathed to them as true values. I am sure that this accumulated rich experience of the people, it will help them now. I have no doubt that they will survive. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is the Media Corporation of China with us?
Yes, Maria Vladimirovna. Good afternoon. We have two questions today. Since September 15th, China has been conducting a visa-free regime for Russians. Russia quickly responded with the same step. We have already received the first tourists from Russia in the first days of Chinese ports. What kind of tourism services in China today, in your opinion, can be attractive to Russians? And how such a policy is able to develop personnel and cultural exchange, help business better understand the Chinese market, and, in general, develop the potential of events?
When I heard, saw, read this news, and it really was, some kind of explosive in a good way, that the Chinese country cancels visas for tourists from Russia for a certain period of time, I first of all thought, to be honest, well, I repent not about Russian tourists, but about the ambassador China in Russia, which has recently done well, in my opinion, the impossible, in order to ensure a high-quality service period in the visa direction of our compatriots, given the fantastic interest and desire to visit China with different goals that we have seen, and of course I think there is such an expression. And since the Chinese ambassador to Russia speaks Russian perfectly with the language, I think he will understand the meaning of this phrase in Russian.
Я думаю, есть такое выражение, а так как посол Китая в России прекрасно владеет русским языком, я думаю, что он поймет значение этой фразы в русском языке.
There is such a concept from the heart relieved. This is when you can somehow breathe freely, when the burden of responsibility is lifted from you in a certain part, so to speak. So I think this is his case, because I myself have witnessed how many Russian citizens in recent years have wanted to get to China for different purposes. We were discovering China, looking for business partners in trade, development, humanitarian relations, cultural cooperation. The only thing I would like to note is that your statement of the question is not entirely correct, because the president of the Russian Federation on the sidelines of the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok in September announced plans of Russia to mirror the Chinese initiative, the introduction of a visa-free regime for Russian citizens. Currently, the issue of introducing a visa-free regime for Chinese citizens is being worked out. I would very much ask you to be punctual in this sense, because this creates a wrong perception, in particular, of the situation by Chinese citizens, and many people are really turning here. Even the other day, they asked if it was possible to come to Russia without a visa. We really have gone through a whole cycle of simplifications. There are electronic visas in effect. There is an opportunity to issue them promptly in just 4 days. But for now, as for the cancellation or mirror response to the introduction of such a visa-free format by the Chinese side for Russian citizens to visit China, this is in the process of being worked out. Russian tourists have always been interested in traveling to China. This is justified now, in recent years. Once again, I say this multiple times, this interest has increased many times. We understand such trips perfectly well, and according to reviews, from our own experience, they do not leave anyone indifferent. They are invariably accompanied by amazing discoveries and new impressions, and children's cuisine, and the rich cultural heritage of China, extraordinary natural recreational resources, attractions of China. It seems to me, you can talk for hours. You really need to see it all the more, because China is not only large cities, it is also provinces as administrative divisions. It is nature. It is amazing climatic zones and amazing cultural identity, considering the number of nationalities that live in China. But the main thing, of course, that needs to be noted is the hospitable and welcoming people who selflessly treat us as friends, with whom it seems to me pleasant and interesting to communicate, who are always happy to our tourists and our tourists feel it.
Приятно и интересно общаться, которые всегда рады нашим туристам, и наши туристы это чувствуют.
And I am sure that in the future, when these decisions are issued on visa-free entry, even more citizens of our countries will be able to visit Russia and China, and the mutual tourist flow will continue to grow. I am absolutely convinced that a deeper acquaintance with each other's culture and traditions will contribute to strengthening the social foundation of interstate relations, improving mutual understanding, strengthening friendship, even broader practical cooperation, and establishing strong ties between the business community of our countries.
Thank you very much, including for correcting this, apparently from a great desire for Russia.
You know, I understand you very well, but I just stressed it for some reason, in order to be absolutely, so to speak, accurately perceived by you and me by the audience, so as not to create a misunderstanding, and people do not, as it were, disrupt their trips. Therefore, here you need to always be very precise. They said you still have a second question.
Ah, thank you. And you have partially touched on this topic today, and yet at the September session of the UN General Assembly, a number of European countries are going to recognize the statehood of Palestine. In this case, the number of countries that have done this will already exceed 150. And how do you assess the significance of this trend and its impact on the future of the Palestinian question? And in this regard, can we say that against the background of the ongoing Israeli operation in Gaza, the United States and Israel are moving away from the international community, for example, not only morally, but also politically?
You know, to be honest, I would like to be non-emotional in answering your question, but it definitely won't work, because I get shots every day. I see them and you get them. We all see these shots, the suffering of people in Gaza. And for me, the position of many Western countries is absolutely cynical when they say that the decision to recognize Palestine has already been made by 75%. A week later, they say, you know, a decision has already been made by 79.5%. But now, I hear almost 99% of the decision has been made, and Western leaders in a number of states are saying this. In other words, this is not the so-called ideological narrative or the lexical vocabulary that has been developed in any one country. It happens that in some country, in some language, in some political system, there is such a tradition, yes, to talk about the percentage when making some decisions. No, it is obvious that there is some kind of a single written manual on how to tell them. I do not know whether in the bowels of the European Union or in the bowels of NATO. Well, it is clear that Western Europe is fed, so to speak, by this very single methodological message in this percentage, and even how they play with words, how they are irresponsible about making such decisions. What a verbal balancing act is being demonstrated, how insignificant it all is against the background of the suffering of people who, yes, in general, should have counted on decisive actions by the international community, but at the same time, they saw nothing from the West except this very gesticulation with numbers, percentages, and words. Wait almost soon. I must not repeat that the issue of recognizing a state, an honest state of Palestine, the sovereign right of each individual country, is the basis for today the legitimate rights and aspirations of the Palestinians for self-determination, including the acquisition of their own state, are recognized by 149 countries. Russia is among 149 countries. More than 30 years ago, this decision was made by our country. It was not adopted for the sake of applause, not as I don't know what kind of political maneuver. It was adopted in the interests of a two-state decision, which in fact helped to save it. And our position on the lack of alternative to such a formula remains unchanged to this day. Remember how this decision was made. No one claimed there and no one was engaged in this verbal balancing act. But at the next stage, the priority direction of Russian diplomacy is to reverse the negative dynamics in the region, stop the war, ensure an immediate unconditional ceasefire, the release of hostages and prisoners, unhindered full-fledged humanitarian access. These are tactical tasks, but the strategy is inextricably linked with this tactic, namely, the establishment of a negotiation process between the Palestinians and Israelis on a universally recognized international legal framework providing for the creation of an independent and viable state of Palestine within the borders of 1967th year, with its capital in East Jerusalem, coexisting in peace and security with Israel. Consolidation of the position of external players is of fundamental importance, as Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has repeatedly stated. Such countries should be guided, not so much by their own political interests and intentions in the region, as by the need for a coordinated search for an early settlement of the conflict. The entire history of international efforts to resolve crisis situations in the Middle East demonstrates that it is impossible to overcome the Middle East crisis, including the confrontation over the Palestinian issue, without concerted joint efforts based primarily on the interests of the states of the region. Serious attention was paid to the situation in the zone of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict by the participants of the 8th Ministerial Meeting of the Strategic Dialogue Russia Cooperation Council of the Arab States of the Persian Gulf. Let me remind you that it took place recently, on the 11th of September in Sochi. This issue, of course, will be the focus of attention planned during the high-level week of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. On September 22nd of the second round of the International Conference in support of a two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, literally at the end of last week, on the 12th of September, with an overwhelming majority of 142 votes, with a minimum number of those who opposed and abstained. This is 10 out of 12. Accordingly, the resolution of the UN General Assembly on the convening of this forum was adopted. The Russian delegation, as in the framework of a similar July meeting, will be headed by Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Vershinin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The news is with us. Ru.
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Good afternoon.
News portal less than Earl greater than Mikhail Rosen. We have 3 questions. The first of them is that American business is interested in resuming direct flights with Russia and creating conditions for its profitability. This was stated by the head of the American Chamber of Commerce in Russia, Robert A.G. How do you assess this proposal, and does the United States have a real desire to resume normal trade and commercial ties with Russia?
You know, I want to say that this is not only a demonstration, so to speak, or a visual illustration of the improving cooperation, but it is a demonstration that American business will stop losing the profit that it could count on. Now, the absence of a direct message says and implies that this money is passing by American businessmen. First of all, completely different air carriers are being fed. Completely different countries are making a profit. At the same time, there are all opportunities to really earn clean money on this, not some kind of bloody clean money. Therefore, it seems to me that everyone has an obvious advantage without landing flights from the point of view of convenience, comfort, and time saving. That's how much the previous administration said about environmental protection. Remember, yes, there are emissions, stuffing and so on, gases, the greenhouse effect. Well, everything that is connected with this, I can list it all. At the same time, they made these flights so much longer, simply canceling a direct non-stop 9-hour flight to New York or to Washington. Do you understand how interesting it is? As soon as we need to talk about ecology, they are the first. I mean representatives of liberal dictatorships and so on. As soon as it comes to implementing what they said as their absolute priority. Remember how they dragged this little girl Greta Thunberg around all the conference halls and stands. but as soon as it comes to implementing it specifically on Earth, the political conjuncture immediately turns on and everyone forgets about this whole green agenda, and as if it doesn't affect anything. So I think that, of course, the resumption of these flights will be enthusiastically received by the Russian-American business circles, interested in restoring trade and economic cooperation, and it will also be convenient and useful for Russian-American citizens. After the return of direct flights, everyone who now has to spend a painfully long time with a transfer, and sometimes not with one to get to both ends, breathe a sigh of relief. On February 27th of this year, during bilateral consultations on eliminating irritants in Istanbul, the Russian delegation pointedly raised the issue of opening the sky to American diplomats. We have also submitted relevant documents to the US aviation authorities with a proposal for algorithms for removing the air blockade on a mutual basis. No meaningful reaction has been received from Washington yet. We look forward to an early oncoming movement of Americans for a substantive discussion of the launch date of direct flights, and regarding the desire of the United States to develop bilateral trade and economic cooperation on our part. You'd better ask the American partners, because it was their compatriots who did everything to block all this. Let them comment on it.
Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna. And we have one more question. The European Court of Justice has overturned the decision of the European Commission on state aid to Hungary for the construction of 2 new nuclear reactors at the Paks nuclear power plant. The Russian-Hungarian construction financing agreement was found not to comply with EU regulations. Why is Brussels trying to disrupt the construction of the station?
Oh, this is very interesting, because in all this drama, attempts to prevent the construction of reactors at the Paks nuclear power plant, there is a clear Austrian trace. Well, look, the initiator of the corresponding lawsuit was Vienna, because back in 1978 year, it proclaimed the main meaning of its energy policy, the idea of atomic radicalism, and that this means a complete and unconditional rejection of nuclear energy. Austria recognizes nuclear energy only as a transitional role in the process of green transformation. It categorically denies its status as an environmentally safe source. So there are efforts to disrupt one of the most important projects for Hungary's energy security, with the participation of the Russian country. With genuine euphoria, it is the Ministry of Energy of the Ministry of Energy of Austria that is being promoted. It is noteworthy, but in my opinion, there is also another thing. The European Commission itself is just really an anecdote, but a huge number of such anecdotes are now connected with Brussels. Look, the European Commission ranks nuclear energy and natural gas as green energy sources. Look again at the decision of the European Court of Justice a day earlier on September 10th. It rejected the lawsuit filed in October of the 22nd year by the same Austria and found that the European Commission has the right to qualify projects using nuclear and blue fuel as sustainable and climate-neutral investments. The judges recognized the lack of technologically, economically sound alternatives in the form of renewable energy sources for the purposes of uninterrupted energy supply to Europe. The argument of the Austrians regarding the negative effects of atomic energy was considered mostly speculative and not supported by a factual basis. Well, apparently they distort this court decision as well. It turns out that this understanding does not apply to Russian projects, does it? Our Hungarian partners, for their part, confirmed their commitment to the bilateral agreements reached earlier. They demonstrate a determined continuation of cooperation and fully fulfill their obligations with regard to the implementation of the flagship Russian-Hungarian project to expand the Paks NPP, which is being carried out as planned according to the established schedule. But I also want to say the following. Yes, under the pressure of these very liberal circles, on the money that was supplied by all sorts of outsiders, other, so to speak, grant givers, Pressure has been exerted in Western European countries for decades. Interference has been carried out in the energy policy of these countries, these peoples. In what way? Well, look through the so-called Greens, through the so-called pseudo-ecologists, who did not see the environmental problem existing under their noses, but at the same time believed that they had the right to talk about topics related, for example, to the nuclear industry, to nuclear energy. They used these forces, which I called, and through so to speak grants through support influenced, including, first of all, the Anglo-Saxons, on the decision-making with Western countries on the development of nuclear energy.
В том числе и в первую очередь англосаксы, на принятие решения с западными странами о неразвитии атомной энергетики.
Someone went their own way, like France, for example, and achieved significant success, both in the construction of nuclear power plants and, very importantly, in the development of the field of science that is related to the safety of nuclear energy. In other words, these processes went on in parallel: the construction of a nuclear power plant and the expansion of scientific research in the field of safety and their application in practice. In other words, it stimulated the French industrial economy not only in obtaining its own energy as a resource, but also gave impetus to the development of entire industries, production, economy, and so on. And a number of countries have fallen victims. Again, the lack of their own sovereignty and independence. Germany, which imposed the absence or underdevelopment of nuclear energy, who imposed it through the Green Party, through, so to speak, various political currents that served American, Anglo-Saxon interests. This has thrown them aside in their development and has now demonstrated that they are in a certain sense at a dead end, and due to the lack of their own powerful energy system, and with digitalization and the development of artificial intelligence technologies, the energy consumption sphere increases many times in the development of entire clusters of industrial production. Therefore, summing up briefly, I would like to say to those who interfere with Hungary and Austria, do not envy, you have made your choice. Please be patient now, and Hungary has made its choice.
Thank you very much. And the final question: in Poland, a wave of pro-Russian sentiments is growing, while critical views on helping Kyiv are growing. This was stated by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. The official Warsaw is afraid of this, and why, in your opinion, does the political class of Poland not want to hear its voters?
It seems to me that it is necessary to say that common sense is growing in Poland. I would say maybe he's not growing. Maybe he's just reborn. He somehow, after a knockout in which he was under the influence of Russophobia for many years, begins to somehow come to his senses. It is common sense that gets back on its feet, because people and citizens of Poland are asking questions not about how to make Russia better, but how to make it better for themselves, and how to at least stop making it worse for themselves. What kind of pro-Russian mood is this? This is a desire to slow down the destruction of Poland from within under the yoke of this Ukrainian agenda. A lot has been done for the destruction of Poland, and for the destruction of the economy, and for the geopolitical weakening of the country. Such a number of Ukrainian citizens were accepted, as if they were refugees, such a burden on the social cluster, on the economy, on healthcare. All this has not been calculated. Such a blow from the rupture of relations with Russia, people are asking questions. And for what is all this happening? And what a bonus for Poland itself from all this? Certain Polish elites periodically throw in the thesis that you need to be patient a little bit, and, as it were, part of Ukraine will return to Poland, its western part. But for some people inside Poland, these conversations are not particularly encouraging. They ask the question how to be now, so this thesis, which you know as spent fuel, is no longer unsuitable for further use, but at the same time requires the cost of its disposal. The theses of Russophobia and the thesis of Russophobic theses. They really become a burden already for the citizens of Poland. That's what they're talking about. But the Polish leadership returns them. This is in the form of the fact that why do you support Russia? And what does Russia have to do with it? Poland has a huge number of internal problems. I think there is one more point. Polish citizens are tired of being asked to turn a blind eye to the historical crookedness, the lack of historical truth, the Nazi Bandera misanthropic nature of the Kyiv regime, just because it is an important part of the fight against Russia. They're tired of it. They understand that this is also such a dead-end path.
Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna.
Thank you. Is the messenger of the Caucasus with us?
Yes. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We have one question. Akkuyu Nekler CEO Sergei Budki said that the first unit of the Akkuyu NPP Mersin, Turkey, will be launched in the near future. It is fully built and commissioning works are underway now. What, from Russia's point of view, is the contribution of this project to Russian-Turkish relations? And how, in general, Moscow now assesses the level of relations with Ankara?
You know, Russian-Turkish contacts are characterized by high intensity. Look, there is a regular dialogue between the President of Russia and the President of Turkey. During the period of the 24th and 25th year, they talked on the phone 12 times, and on September 1st of this year, they held a detailed meeting in Tenzin on the sidelines of the SCO summit, a meaningful and operational channel of communication, both in the current and bilateral agenda, and on the global regional subject, is maintained between the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, between the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, of course. On the 25th-27th of May this year, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Turkey paid a working visit to Moscow. He was received by the President of our country. Negotiations were held with the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Interparliamentary relations are also actively carried out. On the 23rd-26th of September of the 24th year, the chairman of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey visited Russia on an official visit. On February 26th-27th of this year, the chairman of the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, Valentin Matvienko, paid a return visit to Turkey. The relevant ministries and departments are in close contact. Well, I'm not talking about the work on SOEs. Cooperation in the energy sector has reached a truly strategic level because Russia, as you know, is one of the key suppliers of natural gas to Turkey, and the construction of a nuclear power plant has become, well, without involvement, a flagship high-tech partnership project in the energy field, and we are convinced that the joint implementation with the Turkish side will be a significant milestone in the history of our multifaceted relations with Ankara.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Radio Saga with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Yes. Good afternoon. You are welcomed by Reykjavik. Yes. Oh, hello. It's 7 degrees 10 degrees less than yours. Well, I'm sure you know how to keep warm. Yes. Yes, it will be yes. There is a Zira and a warm spring. This is the question after the incidents of the so-called drone attack by the Russian Federation on Poland and Romania. Here the Icelanders and some politicians began to call for the creation of an Icelandic army, where there will be a specially anti-drone unit. It is worth noting that there is no army in the Islamic Republic at all, and never has been. In Copenhagen, they decided to pull the government out of Scandinavia for record military spending, and the Baltic states are clearly preparing for a clash of war. What is your attitude to this topic? You know, I'm going to ask a simple question first. We will definitely move on to this official part of the answer. I have such a question. When the topic of Iceland is thrown up regarding the need to create its own armed forces, it seems to me that it is also necessary to raise the question, and against whom to fight. That's who the enemy is against whom the army of Iceland will be directed, or who the enemy will attack Iceland. It seems to me that it's just logical before you buy any tool or any device, you need to understand how you will use it. We see that the discussions in the Icelandic public space on the issue of creating their own army in the country are not new. Nevertheless, despite the belligerent attitude of some Icelandic politicians and experts, so far, the overwhelming majority of citizens, as far as I know, as far as we know, have categorically opposed this, because Iceland's lack of its own armed forces is not an obstacle to its transformation into a strategic military base of NATO. For example, in the Arctic, in the North Atlantic. Perhaps it's worth talking about this in more detail. With the financial assistance of the United States and NATO, the Keflavik Air Base is being modernized for the needs of, again, not Iceland but American anti-submarine aviation. A project is being implemented to build a new berth for anyone except Iceland for the navies of NATO countries. Since the 23rd year, nuclear submarines, again not Iceland, but the US Navy regularly enter Icelandic territorial waters. American strategic bombers, including 52, have repeatedly flown in Iceland's airspace, not the Icelandic Air Force, and the scale of naval exercises conducted in the Icelandic water area, with the participation of the navy of other countries, not Iceland, is increasing to a greater extent. The Ministry of Defense of Iceland, in an interview with the media, admitted the possibility of resuming the permanent presence of foreign armed forces in the country. The Avik River is consistently increasing its involvement, in particular in the Ukrainian conflict. It is completely unclear why, including by financing military supplies to the Kyiv regime. All this is done not in their own interests, but as if to serve the interests of others. Having our own army in Iceland is not a matter of principle for us. After all, it is the sovereign right of each country to independently determine its own policy regarding the form of ways to ensure its own security. It is important that today the island republic has actually completely delegated this, to put it mildly, and so has given the provision of its defense to its elder brother, and implicitly integrated into the Euro-Atlantic coordinate system, with all the ensuing risks in the context of the current foreign policy turbulence. To what extent it meets the national interests of Iceland, I think you'd better ask the Icelanders themselves, and ask yourself. For our part, we remain committed to the principle of peaceful development of the Arctic, and we consistently advocate the preservation of the Arctic as a zone of low tension. And we emphasize that the responsibility for the security of the region lies primarily with the Arctic states, including Iceland. Well, I can say that the people are definitely against the Elite Four. I even know why. I want to tell you, if you get cold, come to Moscow. We will warm you up. We'll be there soon. Yes. Can I have a little remarka? Did you talk about logistics? Yes, of course. In short, you need to get through the Baltic countries or Poland and so on. And we went, so it was in the month of August, and we waited for 18.5 hours on the Belarusian-Lithuanian border, from 22 hours to 16:30, with our little son this time. That is, it's hard to get there and it's shorter to build a profitable European curtain with a trolley. Taking this opportunity, I would like to say hello to those in Poland who came up with this. Well, it's not Lithuania, it's Lithuania. Well, Lithuania, yes, in Lithuania. Belarusian-Lithuania, Lithuanian border. Yes, all right, come on, happily. So, is Greater Asia with us? TV channel. Yes, hello, Maria Vladimirovna. We have 2 questions today. Although you have already touched on the first question in part of each of them. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China will take decisive retaliatory measures if NATO countries, under pressure from the United States, try to impose retaliatory duties on China under the pretext of purchasing Russian oil, and, as it seems, this is one of China's harshest statements to the West in the context of its relations with Russia. What, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry, is behind such rhetoric of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, and what consequences it may have for relations in the Moscow-Beijing triangle, Washington in the long run? What is behind such rhetoric? Beijing has a desire to defend its sovereignty, and there is a desire to respond to an absolutely illegal aggressive statement that does not meet international legal norms and the spirit of international law. We have repeatedly pointed out attempts by Westerners to interfere in our relations with China, our relations with China, our relations with a key strategic partner and a reliable friend. This is what causes this anger, hatred, jealousy somewhere. Recently, rumors have been circulating about the ideas of imposing certain restrictions on Beijing due to the purchase of hydrocarbons from Russia. Shouldn't this cause a really justified sharp reaction of rejection? Of course, it is precisely such occasions that mark the right moment to use the entire tools of diplomacy. These are not only streamlined phrases, but they are also unambiguous formulations of the fact that it is impossible to talk like this, and such actions will not remain unrequited, and such thoughts, plans, and philosophy as a whole do not correspond to the status of a civilized state, as in the case of the already existing additional tariffs of the United States on, for example, Indian goods. The Ukrainian crisis, Russia here is just a pretext. Ukraine is a pretext, Russia is a pretext. Simply under these pretexts, the rules of international trade are grossly violated, and brazen interference is carried out in the vital interests of sovereign states, which are also great powers and independent poles of world politics. Moreover, I will add that they are countries that, unlike the Kyiv regime, do not run around with an outstretched hand, but work themselves to produce and meet their needs, and, moreover, solving their tasks. They help other countries in the form of humanitarian aid, in the form of development assistance. We consider such actions unacceptable. Cooperation in the energy sector is an important part of Russia's bilateral practical cooperation with international partners, and we will not tolerate outside interference in cooperation in this area. We proceed from the fact that each country has the right to independently regulate its foreign trade activities, to choose independently with whom and how to cooperate in the interests of economic growth and improving the welfare of nations. We are confident that the course set by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, and reflected in the updated version of our foreign policy concept of March 31st, 2023 year, to further simplify the relations of comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation with the People's Republic of China, will not undergo any changes. This fully applies to the efforts of the parties to increase practical cooperation in all areas. Thank you very much. And the second question. Today you have already touched upon the strategic exercises West 2025. And this year, India joined these Russian-Belarusian exercises against the background of cooling relations between New Delhi and Washington. We see that despite the declared educational nature of these maneuvers, their geopolitical context attracts special attention in the international arena. In particular, Germany and the United States showed concern, and how significant and indicative is such a step by India for our country. You know, I want to say that I would not like to comment on the relations, as I have already noted, of third countries with each other, but I am ready to comment on the relations between Russia and India in particular. We are bound by strong, time-tested bonds of friendship. Our relations, I emphasize, are self-sufficient. Their truly inexhaustible potential is being progressively realized for the benefit of the peoples of the two countries, regardless of the fluctuations of the geopolitical conjuncture or how you formulate the geopolitical context. The solid foundation of the Russian-Indian, particularly privileged strategic partnership, is mutual mutual respect, equality, consideration of each other's interests, and, most importantly, the desire to promote a unifying non-confrontational agenda in the international arena. And if we talk specifically about military and military technical cooperation, which, as is known, has a long tradition, it has never been directed against third countries, has its highest goal of ensuring the interests of national security, strengthening international stability and peace. We welcome New Delhi's participation in the Russian-Belarusian exercises. Any so-called concern expressed in this regard from the outside is frankly groundless and obviously far-fetched. In fact, this is just another form of unceremonious pressure on our Indian friends in attempts to prohibit them. It's up to such a thing to cooperate, interact, communicate with Russia. When will the West finally understand the futility and, in general, the ridiculousness of attempts to give instructions to states that pursue a sovereign foreign policy course? This is, of course, an open question, especially when it comes to powers like India. Thank you very much. Is the voice of the fatherland with us? Thank you. Yes, colleagues, good afternoon. Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon. Hello, the Voice of the Fatherland channel by Alessia Univitina. We have two questions, and the first question. 46 unmember states have signed a statement on Russia's involvement in the entry of drones into Polish airspace on the night of the 9th to the 10th of September. In response to this, the permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the UN, Vasily Nebys, said that the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the night of September 10th did strike at military industry facilities, but on the territory of Ukraine, and the goals in Poland were not planned. He stressed that Russia was not involved in the incident. However, the Ministry of Defense and the Russian Foreign Ministry are ready for a professional dialogue with Warsaw. What kind of work is being carried out by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at this stage? You know, we had a statement in this regard. It was developed, so to speak, then by the permanent mission of Russia to the UN in New York during the relevant events at the UN site. You know, I would like to know about such a thing. You say that 46 states have signed a statement on Russia's involvement in the entry of drones into Polish airspace. But about Poland's involvement in the bloodshed in Ukraine, when they sign some kind of statement. And when they sign a statement on the involvement of drones entering the territory of the Russian Federation, supplied by these very countries, including those among the 46 states. When they write about the involvement of NATO countries in the murder of children, when they write about the involvement of the so-called civilized, and in fact another name for them, in the commission of terrorist attacks by the Kyiv regime, it's all such propaganda, and very small, I would say insignificant attempts to implement it. We have repeatedly faced a situation where Poland, in particular, Russia has some unsubstantiated, unfounded accusations that are picked up indiscriminately by other NATO countries, the European Union. Is this the first time we've seen this? The example of other states is the same. I remember how the completely deranged Theresa May, the British Prime Minister at that time, read out some pieces of paper in the British Parliament accusing Russia of allegedly using a chemical warfare agent there. After that, in the same way, some statements were written and some demarches were made by the embassy of NATO countries, because she demanded it. This is their tactic. This is their favorite technique here in November of the 22nd year. The same story was connected with the fall of a Ukrainian rocket on the territory of Poland, remember? And Warsaw, its so-called allies, declared this missile to be Russian. Neither then nor now we were presented with evidence of some kind of Russian provocation. The entire Ministry of Defense of Russia, indeed, immediately after the incident with drones in Polish airspace, declared its readiness to hold consultations with Warsaw. Well, apparently, it's not interesting in Warsaw. It's interesting in Warsaw to shout and make noise again, because we don't see an adequate reaction from the Polish side. Apparently, The task is to find out something, or clarify, or clarify. Warsaw is not put. The true goal is to once again unleash the anti-Russian hysteria of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Our ambassadors, in working with foreign partners, firmly explain our principal position. It was brought publicly, and was immediately brought to the world public, and the countries of the world majority perceive our arguments. Thank you for the next question. In the Armenian information field, the discussion about the seniority in the relations between Moscow and Yerevan continues. It is suggested that, they say, the Russian side is not ready to take into account the independent decisions of the Republic's leadership. How could you comment on such reflections? And again, could you say a quote? The quote suggests that, they say, the Russian side is not ready to take into account the independent decisions of the Republic's leadership. The discussion about seniority in the relations between Moscow and Yerevan continues. I also saw there that the roles are not so distributed among the brothers. I don't know the subtleties of the Armenian language in Russian. It's probably better to speak sisters. But in general, of course, there is such a primitive conversation that we have observed now in the Armenian media, in general, and in the information field. By the way, we have seen more such strange things. For example, that Armenia is allegedly subjected to such unscrupulous people did not even think of it. I do not know who is promoting it. Well, probably some information service personnel in Armenia allegedly hybrid attacks, and that Moscow is interfering with the formation of the republic there. That's what I read as a sovereign state. He only sees me the province. Even this one has somehow come to me. I don't even know why a change coin and so on. These are a few I prescribed for myself. Well, it's self-deprecating for those who come up with this. I have never anywhere, never met in the vocabulary, in the rhetoric of written oral, publicly or behind closed doors, such fabrications from Russian officials, politicians, even well. This may not be holding any posts but claiming some kind of popularity. I have never heard that anyone from the Russian leadership, from the Russian responsible politicians, would have treated or talked about Armenia like this. Why did someone inside Armenia need to throw it all in and invent it for Russia, inside the Armenian information field? This has never been said, and is not being said by Russian officials, responsible people, and so on. Well, I say again, now about the roles of older younger sisters and brothers. As you know, we continue to proceed from the numerous and deep ties that unite us with Armenia, including in the face of modern challenges, and based on common values and interests. This allows us to characterize them as not just a partnership, but as an alliance. This allows us to be responsible in all cases, and at all times, to relate to building relationships. We treat the relations between Yerevan and Moscow, between Moscow and Yerevan, from the standpoint of sovereign equality. This principle, along with others such as mutual respect, respect for state sovereignty and independence, non-interference in internal affairs, territorial integrity, inviolability of borders, is fixed in the documents fundamental to our relations. I have never heard of anyone appointing leading wingmen to help. We help both when asked, and when we can offer this help proactively. It is there, but no one has ever distributed roles like this here. I would like to emphasize once again that we adhere to this approach in practical matters. Moscow has always respected the choice of the Republic, listened with unwavering attention to the arguments of Armenian friends, took into account their independent decisions, had its own point of view on what was happening. But I say again, it respected the sovereignty of this country. And we hope that our partners will treat the concerns of the Russian country in the same way and take them into account. Thank you. Are the editors of the new regions of Russia with us? So probably not. Then, let's finish the question El Medin TV channel. If someone is not connected now or is not with us, we will answer individually, and we still have the authors. Yes, El Medin.
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
A little bit about culture is far from politics. How do you assess the level of participation and representativeness of Arab countries in the Intervision contest?
It seems to me that the audience needs to be evaluated already. So I can draw your attention once again to the fact that there was a big press conference at the Mansion, and the Foreign Ministry on September 16th of this year was attended by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation Sergei Lavrov, Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian government Mr. Chernyshenko, the Presidential Administration Mr. Kirienko, the head of the Federal First Channel Mr. Ernst. They each spoke from their own angle about the work that has been done. I also remind you that 4 participants from the Arab states, Egypt, Qatar, the Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, confirmed their participation. And now it's up to you to judge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is the author with us? And
Hello, yes, Maria Vladimirovna. Ruslan Pankratiev, the author, and we have 2 questions for you today. You have already answered the first one quite emotionally. Happy news about the visa-free regime between citizens of China and Russia. It is impossible not to rejoice. But maybe it's a short remark. What do you think? This decision, how can it be reflected?
I would like to emphasize that this decision was made by the Chinese side with respect to Russian tourists of a certain category, Russian citizens of a certain category, for the purposes of staying in China. As the president said, our mirror solutions are being worked out.
Well, we hope for the best. It is clear that we are friends, and this will not go unanswered. We are already taking a step forward, and I am already thinking. Next, how do you think this decision will affect or could affect our development of the strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing in the conditions of Western sanctions?
You know, we have self-sufficient relations. We have the desire to develop relations with China. I believe that it was artificial in some ways, and certainly wrong not to stimulate this interest, not from the point of view of not doing it naturally, but from the point of view of not giving people the opportunity to realize it for some period. There was such a period in history. I myself witnessed how there was a separate school of thought, small in number, but influential enough that we should rather strive to the West, where we are loved and expected, and so to speak. The East is not so much in priority. It was not so interesting to me. It was wild to listen to everything. I am like a person who had experience, and have experience of working life a long stay in both Asian and Western countries. I can't imagine how one can say that one region of the world is less interesting or less significant than another. It's just because of illiteracy and narrow thinking, especially since I have always believed that being neighbors with such a long border, with such a history of relations, it is necessary to know and develop relations with China and such a potential of our economy's natural resources. Geopolitical situation requires that people know each other. Therefore, it was strange that this contact has now begun. and in all directions. Look at how many cultural events are taking place in our capital, in our cities, in our regions, and not only those adjacent to China, but literally all of them, literally a cascade. So I recently took part in the opening of an exhibition at the Museum of Decorative and Applied Arts in Moscow of Chinese porcelain, and said that this is literally a cascade of events in all areas from amazing, I think, just finds in the form of organizing a celebration of the traditional Chinese New Year in Moscow, to joint film premieres, as well as similar cultural events take place in China, related to our country. Therefore, all of this finally gets such a right, powerful impulse from all sides that meets the request of people, and I hope that it will continue to be so. And that's really great. And well, you know, to countries of civilization, ancient cultures, with such fantastic achievements, we need to get to know each other. I see the reaction of the Chinese who come to St. Petersburg for the first time, to Moscow, to Nizhny Novgorod. We need to see their delight. We need to see their joy from everything, from architecture, from nature, from cuisine, from people, from history, as well as our people discover China, sometimes even being amazed at how interesting, beautiful and interesting it is from all points of view.
That's great. Thank you very much. And the second question. In light of the upcoming election of a new UN Secretary General, what position will Russia take? Does the official Kremlin support the representative from the so-called global majority countries? And how Russia sees the need for reform of the UN structure in general?
Of course, I was somewhat puzzled with the question about the official Kremlin. We certainly do not consider ourselves in the context of presidential foreign policy.
Definitely.
We share, but I was confused.
I was embarrassed myself.
Yes, in general, of course, we have a consolidated position in this sense. Salas's second term as Secretary General, as you know, it ends in December of the 26th year, according to the informal principle of equitable geographical representation. The turn to nominate a candidate for this position will go to the group of Latin American and Caribbean countries wanted. Although, as you know, the official nomination process has not yet been launched, but everything is already buzzing, everything is in motion. And not only now, it's just, of course, such a story is gaining momentum, a number of former acting politicians, international officials, they have already either indicated their ambitions to compete for this chair or are actively participating in the discussion. There is a widespread call, as you probably heard, know and saw, to appoint a woman as the new head of the UN Secretariat. The Russian side intends to approach the selection of the future Secretary General as responsibly as possible. The chief administrative officer of the World Organization should build his line in an equidistant manner, work to narrow differences between state members, as it is in fact provided for in Article 100 of the Charter of the United Nations, approach compliance with the principles of the founding document of the organization in all their entirety, interrelationship. It is important to avoid reproducing the current situation when the head of the Secretariat goes along with Westerners, condones the usurpation by representatives of the Western group of countries of the Secretariat. As for the reform initiatives, the Russian approaches to this issue, as you know, are consistent in principle. There is no doubt that the organization must keep up with the realities, the main sign of which is the formation of multipolarity. At the same time, the changes cannot be a kind of goal in itself, just for show. It is necessary that they should be of a rational, verified nature, aimed at strengthening the institutional foundations of the United Nations, and preserving the division of labor, if I may say so, between its main bodies, increasing the effectiveness and operational potential of the World Organization, as well as enjoying the widest possible support of member states, and being carried out under their tight control. Because this leads to, again, we are back to the question of the effectiveness of the adopted and developed reforms. Otherwise, any transformations will work in the opposite direction, just in the negative, and turn into an additional decrease in the authority of the UN, which is the most dangerous thing. That will provoke a split in the international community. Thank you just in case.
Vladimirovna, please excuse me, but I wanted to convey to you a big hello and a low bow from the organizers and all participants. A large forum of modern journalism, Russia, is currently taking place in Sochi. That's where I am now.
Yes.
And from all these participants, you just like this.
A big one. Thank you so much. So you are in Sochi now.
Yes.
Is there really a pearl in the hotel?
How did you guess?
But I do.
Traditionally.
Sochi, and all the more so this hotel, which has always traditionally become a place of entertainment for various creative people, but also journalists, including you. My response is to convey my huge greetings to everyone. Also a low bow. As you know, we stand guard over domestic journalism as an integral part of the global information field. Just in case I ask, are the new regions of Russia with us? If not, then we will answer individually. Thank you so much for participating. As you can see, they were in touch with us from different parts of the planet today. So many thanks to everyone. Until next time, good luck.
Goodbye.